Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Barakahakudash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 20. Therefore, hear the counsel of Yahweh that he hath taken against Edom. And the biblical Edomites are known as these so-called white people today. These Americans, Europeans, the British, Russians, Australians, South Afrikaners, etc., etc., and his purposes that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. And that least of the flock is speaking of those Amalekite Edomites over in the Holy Land right now, calling themselves Israelis. They're not the true children of the Most High. They're Amalekite Edomites. And as it says, surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Those 1948ers, as I'll call them for the rest of the video, are going to do something to trigger an attack from Iran on them, or just create some false flag situation to justify themselves in going to war against Iran. And it's going to draw out the United States of America and these other NATO nations in on the side of the state of Israel and on the side of Iran, Russia, China, and Iran's other allies. And that's going to play into the bigger battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat over in that Middle Eastern region in Joel chapter 3, the War of Armageddon. And in this video, I'm going to go into an article on worldisraelnews.com titled Honeymoon Over, Russia Fires at Israeli Jets in Syria to Show How the Least of the Flock is Drawing Them Out. Russia reportedly fires at IAF jets carrying out bombing raid in Syria, marking shift from previous policy. And that whole Syrian civil war was a proxy war between the United States of America and the state of Israel against Bashar al-Assad to overthrow his government and balkanize Syria, like the U.S. and the state of Israel wanted to balkanize most of the Middle East so that the state of Israel would be the strongest nation in that Middle Eastern region. Just look up the Oded Yinon plan. But Russia and Iran got in on the side of Bashar al-Assad and were able to dash the hopes of the United States of America and the state of Israel of overthrowing Bashar al-Assad. So now you've still got the state of Israel doing airstrikes and other military strikes in Syria against Syrian targets directly and also against Iranian proxy targets. But as we'll see in this article, Russia is actually starting to help out Syria and Iran in retaliation against Israeli military strikes in Syria. Again, further showing how the least of the flock, those Amalekite Edomites, are further drawing down these heathen nations down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for the War of Armageddon. Russia used advanced anti-aircraft missiles to target Israeli jets carrying out airstrikes in Syria, marking a major departure from a previous policy of essentially allowing the Israeli Air Force free rein to operate in the area, according to a report from Channel 13 News, all through the will of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai to fulfill biblical prophecy. We're coming into the last seconds of these last days, the last seconds of the rulership of these heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites, before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven under the true children of Israel, who are known today as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. While never officially confirming nor denying the airstrikes, Israel has bombed numerous Iranian assets and targets in Syria in recent years. Russia, which has partnered with embattled Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, has de facto control over Syrian airspace and until now has not interfered in IAF bombing missions. According to the report, the IAF targeted a number of sites in northwestern Syria last Friday evening. In a statement after the air raid, Syrian military forces said they launched dozens of anti-aircraft missiles at Israeli aircraft. Those missiles are not advanced enough to pose a risk to the IAF. But Channel 13 noted S-300 batteries also fired on Israeli jets. The advanced anti-aircraft S-300s were donated to Syria by Moscow and are operated strictly by Russian military personnel. So Russia has skin in the game. Although the system was unable to lock onto the IAF jets and the aircraft were not in serious danger of being hit, the move may signal a serious shift in Russian policy regarding Israeli activity in Syria, and expect to see more incidences like this take place over in that Middle Eastern region to further draw down these heathen nations down into there for the bigger battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. In February 2022, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova spoke out against IAF airstrikes in Syria in an unprecedented public statement denouncing Israel. Israel's continuing strikes against targets inside Syria cause deep concern. They are a crude violation of Syria's sovereignty and may trigger a sharp escalation of tensions, she said. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. In January 2022, Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar newspaper said that Syria and its allies, including Iran, expressed deep dissatisfaction with the Russians, demanding that Russia stop allowing IAF airstrikes in Syrian territory. Syria and its allies would be forced to react to the airstrikes if it doesn't restrain Israel, they reportedly warned Russia. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and other Israeli officials have reportedly referenced the strategic importance of maintaining strong ties with Russia. Hey, those ties aren't going to last forever. Eventually, Russia will come in on the side of nations like Iran to go against the United States of America, Israel, and these other NATO nations during that War of Armageddon, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Israeli commentators and analysts have said that Moscow's policy of permitting IAF raids in Syria is one reason why the Jewish state has been reticent to formally support Ukraine or transfer military aid to the country. That's it with this article. You get the point. But as we can clearly see, biblical prophecy is taking place right before our very eyes. The Most High is a master chess player and is putting all these different pieces into play to further foment that battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat in that Middle Eastern region, causing the least of the flock, these Amalekite Edomites, these 1948ers, to do things that's going to draw these heathen nations down into that Middle Eastern region. Now let's get back into these prophecies. This is Joel chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, the heathen Gentiles, you Edomites or so-called white people, the Ishmaelites or the so-called Arabs, the Moabites who are the so-called Chinese, the Elamites who are the so-called East Indians, etc., etc. Prepare war with Iran, World War III, the War of Armageddon, nuclear war, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. And as we can clearly see, those mighty men, Russian military personnel, are in Syria, in that Middle Eastern region, now starting to help in retaliatory strikes against Israeli airstrikes in Syria, against Syrian forces, as well as Iranian proxy forces. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh, and those mighty ones are the death angels of the Most High, holding back this great destruction, waiting to get the go-ahead to release it, which is going to mainly happen after the charagma, the mark of the BEAST in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18 is mandatorily implemented, and that MOTB is, of course, the RFID/NFC, MICROCHIPIMPLANT. Let the heathen be wakened. The United States of America, the State of Israel, Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, these other NATO nations, and come up to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew is Yahweh Shaphat, which means Yahweh's judgment. And when you go up to the first couple of verses in this chapter, you'll see the reason why Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai is gathering these heathen nations down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat to judge them for afflicting the apple of his eye, the children of Israel, who are again known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. And at the top of that list, as pursuant to Psalms chapter 83, are you Edomites. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. And with articles like that, we can clearly see that the day of Yahweh is very near in the valley of decision. And also, it's a part of biblical prophecy for Russia to be a guard unto these smaller nations that the West, the United States of America, the State of Israel, and these other NATO nations go against. This is Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, which is the biblical name for Russia, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. And that's the Most High putting that old confrontational Soviet Union spirit back on these Russian Edomites, which we can see with their military operation in Ukraine. And as we just read about in that article on worldisraelnews.com, they're helping Syria do retaliatory strikes against Israeli airstrikes. And I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company, with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. And this is Russia's military hardware: tanks, fighter jets, helicopters, artillery pieces, S-300s, S-400s, etc., etc. All their military assets being gathered down into that Middle Eastern region for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Persia, which is the ancient name for Iran, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer, which is speaking of Turkey, because Turkey is going to betray the West and ultimately ally themselves with Gog or Russia during World War III, and all his bands. The house of Togarmah of the North Quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them, be thou a protector unto them, be thou an ally unto them. And as it says in verse 5, Persia or Iran is one of the nations that Russia is going to be a guard unto. And like I've been saying throughout the video, since the U.S. and the state of Israel failed in overthrowing Bashar al-Assad, now the state of Israel has been reduced to just doing airstrikes and other military strikes in Syria against Syrian targets and Iranian targets as well. And it can also be said that Israel's continuing military operations in Syria is just another front in their proxy war against Iran. The Syrians know this, and the Iranians know this as well. Hence, why back in that article, they were getting on Russia and not doing more and helping them retaliate against Israeli airstrikes. As it says, in January of 2022, Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese newspaper Al-Akbar newspaper said that Syria and its allies, including Iran, expressed deep dissatisfaction with the Russians, demanding that Russia stop allowing IAF airstrikes in Syrian territory. And as we just seen, Russian-operated S-300s retaliated against Israeli airstrikes, showing that Russia is fulfilling its part in prophecy in being a guard unto these smaller nations. And what's also being fulfilled, the least of the flock, those Amalekite Edomites, drawing these nations down further into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon in Joel chapter 3. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong, as we can clearly see we're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.